Hi, I'm James, one of the people behind IconMap. In this completely unscripted video, I'm going to give you a tour through IconMap Slicer, show you some of its different capabilities, and let's see where this goes. So first of all, we need to bring IconMap Slicer into PowerBI Desktop. So I'm going to click the three-dot button here and choose Get More Visuals. Then in the search box, I'm going to search for IconMap, choose IconMap Slicer, and hit the Add button. And now we can see we've got IconMap Slicer available to select and drag onto our report canvas. Now, obviously, before we start building any maps, we need some data. Now, I've already brought some data into this report, so let me quickly show you what it looks like. It's just some simple open crime data. There's 65,000 rows though, so there's a fair bit. And let me walk you through the columns. So this relates to open crime data from 1 month in London. We have the crime type, so the type of crime that the crime relates to. Each row in the data set represents an individual crime. So we've got a number field just for the number ones that we can then aggregate up by either crime type or location. We've got the longitude and latitude where that crime occurred. But you'll notice that we've got multiple longitude and latitudes that are the same because we've had multiple crimes occur in the same location. So in order that we can aggregate up effectively using Power BI's powerful backend, we've added an additional column in here, which is just a simple text field with the longitude and the latitude combined into a single field. And that gives us a unique identifier for that granular location where the crime occurred. And we've also got the local authority within London, again, in which the crime occurred. So let's have a look what this looks like. Now we can add some simple visuals to our report, so we can break down the number of crimes by local authority or by type of crime, as you'd expect. I'm not going to play around with the bar charts to make them look nice, but you get the idea. Now over here in IconMap Slicer, I now want to visualize these crimes. Now I'm going to do this in two different ways. I'm going to start by dragging on latitude and longitude, and I'm going to drag in crime count into circle size because I want circles on the map. But you'll notice at the moment nothing's actually happened. And the reason for that is we have to have a field here in the ID section. And this ID section determines the granularity for the items that we want to show on the map. Now, because we've got multiple crimes occurring at the same location, I don't want to have to pass all 65,000 rows into IconMap and let it work out which ones are in the same location. I want Power BI to do that for me, so it passes the minimum amount of data into the visual layer so that it performs really quickly. So let's start with local authority. Now you remember in our data set we've got the local authority for each crime, so let's drag that in and I'll show you what happens. We get a circle for each of the local authorities where that crime occurred. And because we're averaging our longitudes and latitudes, we get a circle in the center point of each of those local authorities, because all of those longitudes and latitudes are being averaged per local authority. Now, for this to work, you need to make sure that your longitude and latitude fields are actually decimal numbers and not text fields. So you need to make sure that the data type is right. You can check that quickly, either in Power Query as you bring the data in, or if you click on one of those columns in Column Tools, you can check that the data type is actually decimal number. You also need to make sure that the aggregation type is average. So if you click the little drop-down arrow there, you can make sure that it's set to average and not sum or max or something else. If it's showing as count, in all likelihood, your longitude and latitude fields are actually text fields. Okay, so this has given us a circle for each local authority area, but what if we actually want a circle for those granular level locations where the crimes have occurred? Well, the answer there is we can drag in that field we created with the longitude and latitude combined. Now, I can either drag it in to replace local authority, at which point we'll get all of those individual locations displayed on the map, and there's a lot of them. I think there's about 30,000 locations here, if not slightly more. Or the other option we have is to drag both fields in. So if I drag local authority in on top, we go back to local authority level, but Power BI will turn on the drill down options, so I can click to drill down, and then it will go in to show the detail just for that one local authority. Okay, so that's the basics of how to add data into the visual. Let me walk through then some of the formatting options that we have. So the first option is background layers. In Icon Slicer, you'll get the option of lots of different background styles. There's lots of different types to choose from, both coloured ones, some with really detailed 3D buildings available, if I zoom in far enough, and others like Data Viz, my favourite, which is just a clean white background that effectively provides a nice plain canvas to start putting our Power BI data on top of. We also have lots of other options in here. You can change the language of the labels, and we can turn off those labels, but also decide whether we want to include roads and railways on the map, whether we want administrative boundaries, whether we want buildings, points of interest, land use and land cover, that kind of thing. And we can even modify some of the colours on the map. So I can change the colour of the water and the ground if I want to. So we can start to build really customised maps really quickly. So we can get some, I'm not sure this is nice, but you can generate some maps that really match the colouring of your brand. But for now, I'm going to return that to the defaults. We've got other options in here as well for adding things like hill shading or to view the background in 3D. But we'll leave those off for now. So that's backgrounds. And then on top of the background, we have the option to add overlays and reference layers. So the idea of these is that they add additional context to our background map, but they're not necessarily populated from our Power BI data. So the first option in here is map labels. And the idea of having the map labels as a reference layer is we can turn them off on our background map and turn them on here, and we can choose a Z index so that we can decide whether those labels appear on top or below or in between our other data layers. So this Z index setting is quite important. You'll see that all of our layers in Icon Map have a Z index, and it allows you to have control as to which layers appear in which order. So that's map labels. We also have the option in here to add a daylight terminator, which updates in real time, so we can see where it's night and day in the world. And if I find somewhere over land to zoom in, you'll see that line updates every second and slowly moves across the map. So if you're doing near real-time reporting, tracking vehicles or incidents across the world, this can be really useful to know whether that location that you're looking at is likely to be up and running yet. We can add in custom vector tile layers. That's a topic for a whole other post, but it allows you to bring in really large, really detailed additional layers, including polygons, line strings, and additional points. Similar for raster tiles, again, I'm not going to show that now, but you can bring in things like satellite imagery, drone footage, or just hand-drawn imagery if you need to, and place it on the map. And then GeoJSON, shape files or KML files, if we just wanted to add some static boundaries on the map to show those differences in local authorities, we could do that too. So let me find a quick file, and I'll drag it across and you'll see what happens. So I've got an Esri Shape file here with all of the local authority boundaries for the UK. So let me turn this layer on. Now we're going to not source it from an external URL. In this case, we're actually going to upload it and store it inside the report. So I choose uploaded file. We've got some settings here that will automatically simplify that file as it's loaded in. It's quite large, too big really to store in Power BI, at least in the visualization layer. So it's going to shrink that down for us automatically. So we'll expand out the configuration. I'm going to click the display file upload toggle button, and then I can drag in my local authority Esri shape file. Takes a moment just to process, do that simplification, change the coordinate system over, and then we get those local authority polygons shown. Now, I don't really want the grey background. I still want to be able to see my background map behind. So I'm going to go down and just change the fill transparency to 100%, and then we'll be able to see through it. We've got some other advanced options in here as well. So we can choose in Icon Slicer to have polygons like this act as a selection tool. So if I turn on use polygons for selection, let's go down and view all of our detailed crime data. Zoom in a bit. What I can do then is just click anywhere inside one of those polygons, and it will automatically select all of the items inside that polygon for us. So it gives us a really useful tool for selecting multiple items at the same time. I'm going to turn that off for now. Okay, so that's overlays and reference layers. We'll turn our boundaries off for now, just to keep things simple while I'm walking through features. So the next option is data layers. So the data layers are items on the map that we've sourced from our Power BI dataset. So we've got multiple options in here. We've got circles, we've got columns, we've got hexagons, we've got images, we've got lines, we've got shapes actually sourced from the Power BI dataset. So you can store polygons, line strings and points, multi-points, inside the actual Power BI data and source them from there to save you bringing in and storing external files inside the visualization layer. Or you can bring in those external files either on the fly from a URL or upload them and store them inside the report as we showed a moment ago. And we've also got the option as well to bring in vector tiles. So again, those really detailed polygons or line strings that I talked about earlier. The difference when you bring them in as a data layer is you can actually conditionally format them based on Power BI data on the fly as they're being displayed. So it gives you a really performant layer for showing potentially hundreds of thousands of complex polygons on the map. But let's start with the basics with circles. So, for all of the data items, you'll find a configuration section and a formatting section. For circles, the configuration section really determines how those circles are drawn on the map. We can choose how size behaves, whether we want to size our circles in pixels, where the circle will stay the same size on the screen as we zoom in and out, or size in meters, where the circle stays the same size in terms of distance on the ground as we zoom in and out. But the default's relative. The relative will draw those circles as a range of pixels between the sizes that we draw there. So in our case, Westminster here, that has the most amount of crime, will be drawn as a circle of 60 pixels, and here in the City of London, that has the smallest amount of crime, will be drawn 2 pixels across, and then all of the other circles are scaled in between those two values according to the amount of crime in those particular local authority areas. Other settings, pitch alignment, so this determines what happens when we tilt the map. So the default is viewport, where the circles stay the same, but if I change that to map, Now when I tilt the map, those circles will stay flat on the map. So different behaviours according to the kind of map that you're creating. I'm not going to go through all of these settings one by one, otherwise this video will take hours. But I will highlight these. So on a row by row basis, we can determine using the FX button here with a field in our data, we can decide whether each individual circle is included when the map automatically zooms to the data, whether we include a tooltip for that item, and whether you can click on it to make a selection. So you can have some items on the map that are selectable and some aren't, for example. And then down in the formatting options, you'll notice everything supports conditional formatting, and you can change the outline colour, so that's the border of the circles. We can make them white if we wanted. We can change the transparency of that outline. We can change its width if we want. We can set the fill colour of the circles, transparency, and we can make them blurry if we want a blurred effect. And as I say, all of those properties support conditional formatting. So if we want to colour our circles as a gradient based on the amount of crime, then we can choose the gradient option in here. Or if we want a different colour based on more static levels, we could create rules. So if the crime's more than 500 in this area, make it red, that kind of thing. But let's stick to a gradient for now. Okay. So that is circles. Now, what I'm going to do now is go back and remove our longitude, latitude combined. Actually, that's not what I want to do. Let's go down and just deal with that granular data. So we'll get all of those circles displayed on the map, but actually, maybe my colour choice wasn't the best there. Let's go now to a dark background. We'll get all of our circles visible. There we go. I'm going to swap now from viewing circles, and instead I want 3D bars. So to do that, I need to turn the columns option on. I'm going to turn circles off, and you'll notice that we don't get the columns appearing automatically. Now, the reason for that is in Icon Map you can display circles, columns, and all of the other types of item at the same time. But because Power BI only lets visuals request one query of data, to be able to display all the layers at the same time, Icon Map needs to determine on a row by row basis whether that row of data relates to a circle or a column or a polygon or whatever else. And to do that, it uses which fields are populated with data on a row by row basis to determine what type of object to display on the map for that individual row. So at the moment, all of our data that gets passed into the visual is configured for circles, and I can check that. If I go down into the formatting options in diagnostics and choose show data configuration summary, we get the view of how Icon Map is seeing and interpreting the data. And it gives you a little summary up here. And it's basically saying that we've passed in 26,000 rows of data. All 26,000 of those rows were capable of being rendered on the map, but all of them as circles. But it's telling us that we haven't got the circle layer turned on. So what we can see here is for circles, we've found that it's configured correctly, but the circle layer is turned off. If I go down to those 3D columns, it's saying the 3D column layer is turned on, but it hasn't found any data. Now the reason for that is to display 3D columns, we need the ID field, the longitude and latitude, but not the circle size field populated, but the column height. So if I jump back to the visual, and instead of having crime count in circle size, if I drag it to column height, then on the map we'll get 3D bars displayed. And these are a little bit hard to see at the moment, but let's just tweak the formatting. In fact, let's just use that gradient, and then we will get some variation in those coloured bars. Well, I think I've done it on a latitude, but it's actually quite a nice effect. The ones further down are white and the higher up ones are darker blue. But you get the idea. Let's turn those labels off as well. So we get a 3D bar effect of where those crimes are occurring. Now, something to point out here, having just introduced that concept of how the different columns being populated will impact what's displayed on the map. If we populate both circle size and column height, then when it evaluates that row, it won't know whether we're trying to draw a circle or a column, because we've effectively configured it for both. But a row can only relate to one type of object at a time. So if you need to draw circles and columns, you'd need two different rows. One where the circle size is populated and column height is null, and the second row where circle size is null and the column height is populated. So that's how to mix and match multiple data layers on the same report. Let me run through these other data types really quickly. So if I drag that down into H3, we'll know that it will disappear. We're currently expanding this H3 option at the moment to support additional geospatial grid systems as well as H3 hexagons. We're in the process of adding S3 and A5. S3 will give you rectangles and A5 will give you pentagons. But the configuration for those is very similar. I can pick a particular resolution. So it will take all of our longitudes and latitudes, determine which hexagon they should appear in, and aggregate up our data for us. And then we can create a colour gradient as well if we want to highlight those areas. And these are all interactive. If I choose different crime types, you'll see that colouring and the different hexagons update accordingly. So that's H3. We also support passing in actual cell IDs in the ID field as well, and then you don't need to pass a longitude and latitude. So if you've already pre-aggregated your data into a geospatial grid system, we natively support that too. Right, what's next? Images. Right, let's not display 26,000 images on the map. Let's go back up to a local authority level. I'm going to take off H3 weight and turn on our image layer. Now we won't get anything instantly because we haven't told it what image to display. Now we've got multiple ways of doing this. We can either have a field in our data with a URL of an image, and I could drag that into the image field and it would display those images on the map. Worth checking our documentation because there are some requirements around where and how those images are hosted. But you can 64-bit encode them or use SVGs and store them as data URLs inside your PowerBI dataset, or use a DAX measure for those, so you don't have to host them externally. The other option though, if I go into the image configuration section, is we can type in a URL here or assign it using conditional formatting, or we can choose an icon. So we've got multiple options for icons. Change the color because we've got a black background. So the default is a triangle. Now this is just a Unicode triangle symbol. You can go on the internet, find any symbol you want, paste it in there, and it will show that symbol. Likewise, you can have a column in your data set with lots of different symbols in, and choose the FX button and pick that field here, and then it will use different symbols for different rows of data. Or the other option is we can actually just type in text and it will generate an image for us. So if we wanted to, we could actually choose the local authority name, and it would generate images for us with that local authority name in there. And you'll notice that we can change the colour here, again using conditional formatting, so you could have a RGB hex code in your data, or define rules to determine, in our case, which local authority you want it to be different colour, or base it on the number of crimes. Other options for images, again, we can change that viewport, and we can even rotate images around as well. So instead of names like this, if we were tracking vehicles on the map and wanted them to point in the direction of travel, we can put in the compass bearing here, and then the image would be rotated around accordingly. We also have some options in here that if you have multiple images in the same location, you can turn offset overlapping images, and then it will display them next to each other. So if you're showing incidents as icons, for example, and there are multiple incidents in the same place, you can turn that on, and then it will show them side by side. Okay, that's images. Lines, unfortunately I haven't got anything in this data set that I can draw, but to draw lines in Icon Map, you need to provide on the same row of data the origin, longitude and latitude, and the destination, longitude and latitude. And then you need an appropriate ID. So I would recommend for your ID in this case, your ID is unique from that source to the destination. So it could just be the start and end coordinates all in a single field, or it could just be the, source city, destination city as one field combined, and then you'll get a line per different route. You don't need to put anything in any of the other fields, and you can set the line width dynamically using conditional formatting, so you can have different width lines depending on your data. Right, final thing I'm going to show, I think, in this video is the GeoJSON layer. So if we want to create a choropleth map where our local authority boundaries are shown, but they're coloured based on the amount of crime in that local authority, I'm going to keep the local authority here as the ID field, and I'm also going to drag it down into this feature reference section. To join our PowerBI data with our external boundary file, we need a field in our data with values that match one of the properties in our GeoJSON or Esri Shape file. So let's have a look how that works. So with our GeoJSON or Esri Shape file layer turned on, I'm going to change the source to be uploaded file again, same way as we did for the reference layer. I'm going to tick the display file upload button, drag in our Esri Shape file, same file as we used before. Difference this time is those areas in London that we have data for have been matched back to the file, and they display in blue because that's the default fill color for matched data. The ones where we don't have any data are shown in grey because that's the default color for unmatched shapes. I can also choose to remove those unmatched shapes from the map, so we only show ones that we have data for. And then what else can we do? So we can change the fill color so that it is based on the number of crimes. So we get a very quick choropleth map. We can change outline color to black to make them stand out a bit better. And we can even do things like extrude them in 3D. This field here expects a height in meters, so if you want to do it just from this raw crime data, you probably need to create a DAX measure that will generate you a value, I don't know, between 0 and 1,000 maybe, depending on how many crimes you have. Oops. We can try it on the crime count field and see what happens. Actually, that's not bad, but you get the idea of the effect there. we make those polygons appear in 3D. So we can very easily see that Westminster has the highest amount of crime. And of course, as we choose different crime types, I guess we get a lower height in meters, so they'll display lower. Okay, that is all of the data layers that I'm going to show in this video. Other things to talk about, because this is Icon Map Slicer, we have multiple ways of selecting data to filter the rest of our report. We can turn on a couple of other options. So we can turn on a circle select. This probably works better actually with circles. So let me just quickly turn our circle layer back on. Let's have latitude, longitude, and granular level data again. Turn that off. Put crime type back in. Turn off. There we go. Should we make that border a little bit more sensible again as well, so we can actually see our circles? Okay, back to circles. I can go back to talking about selecting items. Let's zoom in. So I've turned on the circle select tool. That gives us this new icon here, which allows us to click and drag on the map and show us a distance in meters and kilometers. And then it will select those items and filter the rest of our report accordingly. I can do the same with the lasso tool if I turn that on. And it will just select those items. We also have other options in here for selecting intersecting items. So if you've got, say, polygons with circles overlaid, all coming from the PowerBI data, when you click on the polygon, it would automatically select all of the circles inside that polygon. And you can even choose a buffer. So rather than it just selecting the ones inside, you can select the ones inside and beyond a certain distance in meters. And then my actual favourite feature in here is to filter by map location. So if I choose longitude and latitude fields in my data, now it doesn't have to be in the same table as my main data that I've dragged onto the map. There doesn't even need to be a relationship between those two tables, but you just need to pick a longitude and latitude field. Now, as I zoom and move around the map, all of the other visuals in our report will get automatically filtered based on the area that we're looking at on the map. So if I zoom right into only a few points, you'll see the breakdown of crimes just in that one particular location. And I'm not selecting anything on the map, I'm literally just dragging it around and zooming in and out. Okay, so I'm going to end this video there. It's been quite long. I've walked through many of the features in Icon Map Slicer. There's a whole ton more than it can do, but hopefully that's given you a good introduction and some ideas, and hopefully you can follow along to some of those patterns. If you've got any questions, of course, please do reach out to us. We'd love to be able to help you get started with Icon Map. Check out the website for the documentation. There's lots of samples on there. Blog section as well. You'll find loads of PowerBI files in there to download with lots of different tips and techniques. Thanks for watching, and hope to hear from you soon.